finally come. The election is over, and I think I can say with certainty in my lifetime, this was the craziest election cycle I've personally ever seen. And I know many of us, especially in the real estate industry, couldn't wait for this to be over. We know Trump has won, and we know there's going to be a lot of changes, which are already happening before he even steps into office. So today, I just want to talk a little bit about how those changes may affect real estate moving forward. So the first topic I'll cover is the recently sore subject of rates. As we know, there have already been two rate cuts this year. The most recent one just last week of an additional quarter point, bringing the total for 2024 down 3/4 of a point. The interesting thing about this is rates have actually gone up. So it's causing a lot of confusion for buyers because where they were expecting rates to go down, the rates have actually crept up. The main reason for that is because the cuts have already been accounted for by the bond market and mortgage lenders well in advance. So I don't think that people are necessarily loving what they see with rates right now. I know here in Florida it's averaging about 7.25. Could be lower, could be a little bit higher depending on your qualifications, but that's where we currently stand. We are anticipating another quarter of a point before the end of the year, and what the Fed has indicated is that they plan on reducing the rates by another 1% or a point next year. Could that be more if inflation gets tamed by certain policies? That's going to be the big question that remains to be seen. Obviously, if it can be more, that would be very beneficial for real estate. If it stays on track, I think it will just fall in line with what people expect. If for some reason they postpone rate cuts next year because inflation goes crazy or something, that would be the worst case scenario. My prediction with this is I think we could end up seeing more rate cuts than what the Fed has indicated. I think specifically with what Trump has mentioned with oil and gas production, that is going to trickle down to other parts of the inflation numbers and ultimately bring inflation lower to what the Fed's target rate is of 2%, maybe even below that. But I do think that we're going to get there quicker, which would lead the Fed to cut rates more than what they've indicated for next year, which again would be great news for the real estate industry and overall consumer buying power. The one caveat I'll make to that prediction is the word of the month for the last few months, which is tariffs. Of course, Trump has mentioned this word a lot and imposing tariffs on countries to get them to do whatever he has on his agenda. So that definitely could play a factor in overall inflation numbers if the tariffs are imposed and making a significant difference in prices of products, especially building materials, things of that nature that have to do with the industry. So that remains to be seen, but that certainly could play a role in all of this. So the second topic to touch on is overall home sales. I think we definitely will see an uptick in sales this year. In my experience, this being my third election in the industry, election years are always slower, primarily due to investors staying on the sidelines for the most part. They want to see where the dust is going to settle and if there's a new administration. Um, as far as end users go, it should tick up as rates go lower. So I think that's ultimately going to stimulate the marketplace a bit. As rates go lower, you'll see people starting to come off of the sidelines and finally pull the trigger on buying a new home. And also, I will say, in my experience, doesn't really matter which side wins. Post-election years are always busier than than an election year. So we definitely should be expecting to see more activity going into 2025. I think another thing to mention, especially when speaking on investors, is foreign investment. I think we'll also see an uptick in that going into 2025. Contrary to popular belief, Last time Trump won in 2016, I was living in Miami and I had started my career 4 years prior to that. And I think the last thing that anybody was expecting was for foreign investment, especially from Central and South America, to go up in the Trump era. I can tell you from my experience, it was funny because my Mexican clients were actually investing more heavily in the Trump era than they were previously. And the main reason for that was because they looked at the dollar as being stronger, as beneficial for them, and safer for their money overall, especially when compared to the Mexican peso or other currencies in South America. So, the reality is foreign investors have a completely different perspective on purchasing property in America, especially if it's a property that they're going to use, that they're going to vacation to with their family. It is a safety deposit box or a savings account that they can actually use. Um, so for them, it's just a completely different perception on the value than what most Americans are viewing because I've seen people lose money on on the sale of their home, and this is speaking for a foreign investor. So they bought the home for let's say $500,000 and they sold it for 450,000. But when they converted the 450,000 American dollars back to their currency years later, when the dollar was strong, they actually made money on the exchange, therefore netting them overall money. So it's just a different perspective for foreign investors compared to us U.S. citizens. And the last thing with sales is ultimately, if policies stimulate economic growth, it's going to bump up consumer confidence, which of course would lead to more purchases and more investment. I think specifically the policies that could lead to that scenario are any tax policies and deregulation, especially for builders or through environmental agencies where you can see new projects getting started much quicker and more easily than they may have in the past. And that leads me into the last topic that I will talk about, and that is regulations. So, any efforts to deregulate, especially in the real estate industry, could certainly help get new construction developments started, which ultimately would increase the housing supply, which would be good. As we know, there's definitely been a issue with pricing because the supply just hasn't quite been there in desirable areas and at affordable price points. So having more new development start could certainly be a way to offset the insane pricing of the last few years. Um, whether or not he will continue on what he did last time around with the opportunity zones is remain to be seen, but I think that that is something that we definitely need. We definitely need tax incentives for developers to build affordable housing in areas where people don't necessarily have access to quality affordable housing. So that is something I would really like to see being continued. I'm sure that there are things that I missed that you may be thinking of, and if so, feel free to leave a comment so we can chat about it. If you made it this far, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.